Hello and welcome to the third video in the March Madness series. This one we're going to cover the Power BI model that you can use to track progress for your March Madness local competition. On Selection Sunday I'll do a fourth video that should be pretty quick, and we'll show you how to update the application you've installed with the new 2021 bracket data. So that look for that on the 14th, later in the day on Sunday. And then everything after that should work, including the Power BI solution that we'll talk about now. So in the description for this video, you'll see a link to another file on Google Drive, and it'll be a PBIT file, a template file from Power BI that you can use to connect to your installed application. So let's talk about how to do that. There's going to be three pieces of information you're going to need to do that, and I'll show you that screen in a second. But two of them they're specific to your install, so we need to get those. So one is if you go to the About screen inside click on the team where you have it. So if you go over to your team channel here, and if you go to the build screen here, for example, we installed it in the previous video in March Madness demo. So if I click on that and then I click on See All, there's two values you need. The first is under the About screen, and that's where you get something I'll show you on the PowerPoint slide. And the other thing you need to get is this prefix here that goes in front of the brackets table. This, in my case, it's CR96D. You don't need the underscore, but whatever's there for your installation, you're going to need that to put into one of the parameters going into the Power BI file. All right, so when you click on About, and I only did this just to hide our tenant ID and stuff, you're going to copy this part of this last line, this instance URL. You don't want any of the brackets, you just want the stuff in between the brackets there. You're going to need that. And then, as I mentioned, you're going to need this prefix value, in my case, CR96D. All right, so when you download the PBIT file, it'll look like this. It's a real small file because it doesn't contain any data. It just has everything else. And templates files are great. I have a previous blog about template files if you're interested on the HoosierBI.com site. And so when you double click on that file, you're going to get this screen. I had previously copied that from the other part, and I can put in CR96D. And then the third parameter you need is whatever you're going to call the bracket that you yourself do, because you're running the competition, where you're going to store the results. And we'll talk about this in the next video, how to track progress, and as games are completed, how to go back in and edit this bracket to do it. But you need to, you don't have to call it results, but whatever you do call it, put it here. Okay, so then we can hit load, and then I'm going to walk through the Power BI file with you. So with that info, with your local values, it should go ahead and bring in all the data. And then we'll hop over to the query editor to show you how this works, in case I'm hoping people will take this and adapt it and make it better. It's a fairly basic report that you'll see today, but it should be enough to track your competition if you decide not to make it any better. All right. So I'll let it come up here, and then I'm going to hop over to the query editor. And I'll just run down these in order here. The first three are those three parameters that we put the values into, so we don't need to cover those. The next thing is a query that I run that I have enable load unchecked on, and I reference this in two of the other queries. And so this one goes into that environment. It filters to a table that ends in underscore brackets, so that's our main table there with the data. If you happen to install this more than once in a given team, this may cause a problem, but I'm assuming you've only installed it once, because then it just goes and gets the top row here and expands the data. And then there's a step that uses the CR96D value in my case, because the columns actually come in with a prefix of those on all the custom fields that I had created. And so what this does is, and you don't need to understand this, but it uses the trick of using list zip and table.column names to go and find all the column names that begin with that and replace that with null. And then we just remove all the columns we don't need. There's quite a few. One more rename, and then we have sort of our base table here. And then these two queries differ only in the filtering that happens. So both of these reference that query I just showed you, and in the brackets table, it brings in all of the bracket submissions except the one, in my case, it'll just be called results, but whatever you define your results bracket, the official one where you're tracking the real game outcomes, everything but that one. And then, of course, the results one is all the ones that are that name. And then there's a second filter here, just so it removes any rows for any games that are not completed yet, because in PowerApps, the collection had been populated with TBD until they get patched and replaced with the selected value. So if the game isn't completed yet, then it filters those out. And then the last one is this points one, and this is actually a enter data table, a manually entered table. So if you want to assign different points to the different rounds, you can hit the gear icon and come here and edit this directly if you want to have different points for each round. All right, so once we do that, we'll close this, and then I'll explain the rest of the report. Just looking at the diagram view here, the model. It's a real simple model. The main fact table here is our brackets data, so there's basically 67 rows for every bracket submission that's there. And there's a one-to-many relationship both with the points table that I just showed you as well as the results table. So this is how it goes over and checks to see if the game matches, to see if they got it correct or not. And then I'll show you on the second page of the report, I have a disconnected table here of the bracket names again. This is a DAX table just using distinct to have a disconnected table of just the bracket names to allow us to do some comparison stuff that I thought was kind of neat. And then, of course, we have a measures table, which is a good practice. All right. So I normally don't recommend doing many calculated columns, but I actually adapted the report that I talked about on Power Pivot Pro years ago. And back then I did more calculated columns than I do today. And I decided just to keep them because it'll keep it nice and performant, and as we pre-calculate some of this stuff. So that's that DAX table, that distinct one. If we talk about the brackets one, there's a few calculated columns here, just to keep things simple. One is it just checks for every row. Each row is a decision of who won the game from that person, and so it goes over and checks. If they got it right, it goes over and checks the results table to see if they got it, and if they did, it gets a yes, if not a no. And then it uses that same one. It says, if correct is yes, then go get the points, otherwise give them 0 points for that. And so we just sum that up to get total points. And then just for knowing what the max points are, we just have a straight related to go over there and get the possible points. I think that's it on calculated columns. I'll just talk about the report pages. There's just 2 pages. Again, kept it real simple. Not great design here, but it's all right, and again, would be enough to move forward with if you wanted. But again, hopefully people will make this much better and share it back out as a PBIT file with others would be great. So there's some summary stuff up here, and I think I populated the results table so that it was all the way through the Elite 8 and maybe started part of the Final 4. So there's a lot of points that have already been possible to get. There's 5 games remaining at this point in the simulated competition. I had populated a bunch of junk data, so this will show more than one for you if you have multiple different submitters, but since they all came from me, it just shows one, and I had submitted just 14 brackets. Actually, with the help of my wife, she helped me populate some of these as well, just to have some data to show. And it just shows a basic table here. It shows the bracket name. People can put in what they want as long as it's a unique value. It'll show who submitted it, and it'll show the total points they've gotten so far, and this is what the sort is on in this table. It also calculates based on which of the teams they've selected are still remaining in the tournament. It calculates how many max points they still could get. So, if even though somebody sees themselves down here, for example, they still have a shot at winning this thing depending on who wins. It gives some stats about how many games that correct and the percent of games they got correct. So it gives people some stuff to track how they're doing relative to others. The second page, we start using that disconnected table here. And so there's some text here that explains that you basically choose one of the brackets. So somebody using this dashboard or report would just pick their bracket name, and then they could see how similar their selections are to other people's submissions by round and then overall. So you could see if how different your bracket is, for example, from others, to see if you have a shot at winning this thing or not. The other thing you can do here is, and you can look at the measures here, I won't get into them here, but this uses the accept function to show the key differences. So for example, if you pick one of these, it'll show you for all of them, but if you just pick one, it'll show you here's all the different decisions they made in each round. And so that may help you pick which game you want to root for to really help you take the lead over someone you're competing with. So I thought that was kind of a neat functionality there. Hopefully you will too. But again, I'm hoping people take this and go even further with it. So, all right. So I think that's it on the Power BI file. See the description below for the link to the PBIT file. And again, if you like the videos I'm making here on Power BI, or now I'm starting to make some stuff on Power Apps, please subscribe so you can see the latest.